David.
Mhm.
I learned much from them in my different formative period. I am not an expert in the uh, what should I say, church history, Nicaea, Council of Nicaea, but I bring more an intervention from the indigenous people's perspective, also very particularly women, indigenous women. Mudali and the team, they were very gracious in accepting my reflection for the upcoming IRM, and I wrote something very rudimentary, I would say. Modali was very gracious in giving me time and also giving me good feedback. So I will read parts of this, and I am looking forward to our conversation. I think it will be worthwhile. I think more than my what I have to offer you. I think our conversation will be worthwhile of your time. Um, I learned a lot working through this. I also learned how much I don't know of the Christian tradition, and I think that's another area, another area to reflect one day. As an indigenous Christian, how much of the history of Christianity we do not know, but we know Jesus Christ very much, and I think that is important. So I'll read parts of what I have prepared. I'm given about 30 minutes and to also have your feedback later. So I shall read what I have prepared. So I begin, and I take this model actually from Professor Andrew Walls, late Professor Andrew Walls, who's one of his famous article had this on the how Christianity has changed its axis, in that he takes the metaphor of an alien visit. So I thought something like that I would start. So I start here. An observant visitor to any of the churches in the mountains between India and Myanmar will notice that the church pews are mostly filled with women, and even more striking will be the division, although lax, of the rows between men and women. Apart from the gathering for worship services, if one were to take a stroll at the crack of dawn along the main road of the village, predictably one would meet some women, either alone or in pairs, walking to the church for prayers. Church attendance and personal prayers are central aspects of spirituality among the Christians in this part of the world, and women are most active and diligent participants in these rituals of church members. Visibility in the worship services and regular prayers at the break of dawn is only half the reality of women participation and experience in the churches on the mountains of into Myanmar regions. Visibility does not translate to empowerment and acceptance of women in the church, divided by centuries, but women in early Christianity also were active participants in the rituals of the community, but their voice are often buried and their visibility blurred in the hierarchical network of androcentric ecclesial structures. I discuss what is or who are Indigenous women and their relationship with the church. And so I begin. What has the first ecumenical council, the Council of Nicaea, to do with Indigenous women in the 21st century? This section, I paint with very broad strokes of the situation of Indigenous women in the church to demonstrate that the principle of exclusion has been operative in relation to women in the church from the era of the Council of Nicaea. The observation made in a stroll in the predominantly Christian villages of Northeast India has parallel analysis in Christian mission scholarship. Some years ago, Dana L. Robert, professor of world Christianity and history of mission, Boston University School of Theology, argued that world Christianity should be analyzed as a women's movement based on the fact that even though men are typically the formal ordained religious leaders and theologians, women constitute the majority of active participants. Robert arrived upon this observation from her research of histories of conversion in the 19th and 20th centuries, especially the Global South. While cultural complexities of specific contexts may yet provide more nuances, the observation that women comprise a majority in filling the pews and in performing the auxiliary services in the church remains valid. In the last assembly of the World Council of Churches held in Karlsruhe in Germany in 2022, one of the workshops was on Indigenous women in Asia, and a member of the Naga Indigenous community, Mary Chung, who serves also as the principal of a theological college in Eastern India, she lamented about Naga women as second-class members, uncounted in matters of governance and excluded from ancestral land rights. They are strictly prohibited from attending or coming near community rituals and celebrations because their presence is considered a bad omen and a taboo. The customary law does not recognize them, even in cases concerning them. They are represented by the father or the brother or any other male member in the family. Although distanced by historical timeline and contextual diversities, women experiences seem more common across cultures and historical periods. For instance, women in the early church functioned as wealthy patrons, leaders of community, and important emissaries. By the 4th century, during the Council of Nicaea, women were relegated to the margins. If the phenomena of world Christianity needs to be seen as a women's movement, the impulse and force undergirding such a movement of women's embrace of Christianity need to be recognized as a women's movement as well. The women missionary organizations of the 19th and 20th centuries were organized and sourced largely by women themselves, with slogans such as Women's Work for Women, Western Women in Eastern Lands. Despite the initial obstacles laid by denominational churches and mission societies, Western women responded to the evangelical zeal to share the good news beyond the regions and work as missionaries in education, medical, literacy work in different parts of the world. Variation in contextual particularities, historical circumstances, and denominational influences exists, yet a general assessment of women's response to Christian mission can be described as a response of eagerness. Drawing from an important article by the mission historian Adrian Hastings, Robert pointed out social as well as spiritual reasons for conversion to Christianity among women in parts of Africa. Yet, women were mere assistants and subordinated to the authority of men in the church. Today, it needs to be recognized, however, that the empowerment of women has begun, albeit incremental, beginning in the mid-20th century, often enforced by policy of equality against discrimination. Women's experience of Christianity in general continue to be challenging and difficult. The fact that there is now awareness, movements, and focused research that describe, excavate, critique, theorize, and advocate for women in the history of Christianity in its local and global levels is significant achievement. While there is increased awareness of the contribution of women within the early church, there are, however, very little resources and analysis of Christianity and indigenous women. One of the reasons for this paucity is the ignorance and deliberate non-recognition of indigenous peoples' life and history until very recently. Happily, the global movement of recognition of the history, culture, and knowledge of the indigenous peoples have begun in the last quarter of the 20th century, with the United Nations declaring to celebrate the International Year of the world's indigenous peoples in 1993. Who are the indigenous people? Indigenous peoples inhabit different regions of the world, from Indo-Myanmar Himalayan ranges to the Arctic countries, from the deserts of southern Africa to islands in Japan, and from North America to South America. The term indigenous peoples encapsulate a heterogeneous people with varieties of culture as conditioned by the natural environment they inhabit in almost all the continents of the world. Some of the specific names of indigenous peoples are Ami, Ainu, Sandal, Pont, Sami, Cherokee, Naka, Mizo, Huki, Karen, Ikorot, Cree, Inuit, Carib, Maori, Vatia, Kuna, Hu, Wa, Warli, Tota, etc. While this list is not exhaustive, it is important to understand that indigenous peoples have their own names, languages, cultures, and history. The term indigenous peoples should not be confused with the terms often found in mission documents such as indigenous, local, and native, among others. Indigenous peoples is the term used to umbrella the different groups of people who share commonalities of historical subjugation and discrimination, in some instances, almost erased share of cultures. Indigenous peoples is the term used for the people who have inhabited the geographical locations they live today from the days of their ancestors, uninterrupted in their spatial location until they were conquered, colonized, and Christianized with the beginning of Western colonial expansion. In relation to Christianity and indigenous peoples, there are variations of experiences, policies, and responses to the evangelization by the missionaries. Relationships between Christianity and indigenous peoples have also diverse records, ranging from violent imposition to being a medium of empowerment amidst dominant cultures and initiation into modernity. Indigenous people share some basic commonalities, such as their shamanic religiosity, gender dynamics, and relationship with the environment. Most indigenous people have a foundational religiosity that is expressed in awareness of a power that is beyond human comprehension, hence only to be recognized with respect and veneration. While most historical records and oral reports point out the predominance of patriarchy, indigenous communities exhibit more pragmatic roles for both men and women, hence minimum discrimination. To be sure, this does not mean oppressions of patriarchy in different forms do not exist in indigenous communities. Knowledge of indigenous people also indicate that they live in relative harmony with the natural environment, and there is hardly any observation of greed and habit of accumulation. Globally, indigenous people make a sizable population of Christianity, despite their minority position in relation to other dominant religions and cultures. Historically, indigenous people also make one of the most responsive communities to Christianizing missions. Reasons might vary for the embrace of Christianity. In spite of the complexities of encountering Christianity, in some contexts, brutal policy of force and exploitation went together with Christianity. For the purposes of the paper, my illustration comes mostly from the indigenous people residing in the Indo-Myanmar border. Across the spectrum of the churches in the region, women comprise the largest demographic, yet they do not have equal participation in the church. Women are not prohibited from pursuing theological education. In fact, in some communities today, women make the highest number of young people pursuing theological education and specializing in areas such as pastoral counseling. The irony of the phenomena is the fact that women are excluded from pastoral ministry. Even for the minority, the mere tokens, I would say, of the recently ordained women, full pastoral position is not given for a woman. The continuation of patriarchal social patterns persist, often solidified with the ecclesial organization and functions established by the missionaries who brought their own cultural patterns of gender roles, working towards realization of living the apostolic faith today. In such times as today, the reality of Indigenous women and their participation in the community should be one of the priorities for the mission of the church. If Indigenous communities have borne the weight, excuse me, have borne the weight in some instances, violence in their experience of the good news of the good news in the life of Jesus. And despite the paradox of embracing the good news coupled with marginalization, many Indigenous communities have integrated meaningfully the faith in Jesus of Nazareth into their community. Then decolonization of mission should advocate for radical empowerment of Indigenous women. Living the apostolic faith today requires critical action that is radically inclusive. The 1700th anniversary of the Council of Nicaea occasions conversation with the realities of Indigenous women and the paradox of both empowerment and exclusion to guide our conversation. I have a section on the Council of Nicaea, which I will not read. I will go to the reflection from the Indigenous women's perspective. Excuse me. So, remembering Council of Nicaea in 2025, Indigenous women remembering. What can be learned from the Council of Nicaea from an Indigenous women's perspective? What significance has the historic ecumenical council that gave shape to the faith that has been meaningful for Indigenous women, as the historical experience of Indigenous communities in relation to Christianity presents a complex legacy? A reflection from Indigenous women in the church raises more questions in the mission of a radically inclusive church. Fundamental questions such as, what has an event that took place 1700 years ago in an entirely different socio-political and cultural milieu to do with Indigenous women in the 21st century? As many Indigenous women experience deep personal spiritual relationship with Jesus Christ without the aid of a creed, especially in ritualistic form of recitation, what relevance for their faith has a historical assembly of church male leaders many hundred years ago? In the midst of their experience of exclusion, as described in the preceding section, and their struggle for survival in the midst of socioeconomic structures that threatened their existence, what purchase a celebration of commemoration of the Council of Nicaea of 325 CE A world religion, Christianity, with a global community of adherents that often maintains rigid traditions that privilege male members, traditions that have their roots in the formative era of the religion, why does it still attract women across different cultures, not least Indigenous women? According to biblical tradition, women were the first witnesses to the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. Yet, women's voices are often silenced or ignored in many discussions, including the debates around the date for Easter celebration. What lessons can be learned from the historical circumstances of the Council of Nicaea, especially from the perspective of Indigenous women and their paradoxical experience of Christianity? In the quest for an inclusive society where women are recognized for their gifts, is the power of the state important in ensuring women's rights and participation? Surely consternating and not without relevance of historical examples of the secular power over the church, the changes and the challenges that continue in the reception of the outcome of the First Ecumenical Council convened by an emperor in that a newly convert are also significant in a reflection on the historic council from an Indigenous women's perspective. These are merely some questions that emerge in casual glimpse of the Council of Nicaea from a general vantage point of Indigenous women. These questions serve as guide in attempting to make relevance of the historic council in the history of the faith, especially from Indigenous women's perspective. In answering these questions, critical excavations from historical investigations and discoveries and assertions of women's voices should become central signposts. In the commemoration of the Council of Nicaea, a guiding vision for decolonizing mission can include remembering of the Indigenous women. Understood in a simple way, the term remembering communicates a prophetic proclamation to include, to make member of those excluded and discriminated and silenced. However, the act of remembering, as recalling and reminding, is not limited to recalling a past memory, but remembering should aid in reading the silences and in seeing the absences. In other words, remembering should include asking the critical question, who are not there and who is not here? The Council of Nicaea was a defining milestone in Christian faith that affirmed the divinity of Jesus, in whom Indigenous women experienced the grace of God. Happily today, there are many studies from different disciplines, history, archaeology, gender, and literature, that are discovering the complexities of the ancient world and the subjectivity of interpretation that have often skewed records regarding women's contributions and ignored realities of women. These studies have informed us today about the role of power, especially in relation to gender and power dynamics. While there is no mention of women's participation in the 4th century council, confirming earlier studies, authors Catios and Luca Bettini Caffalonieri argued that there were women church leaders around 5th century Rome and its vicinities, drawing from biblical traditions of the earliest communities of Jesus' followers. Women served as the leaders of house churches. According to the authors, women continue in the highest roles, such as bishops, for many years before the practice ceased. Literary and iconographic artifacts provide evidence of a tradition of women bishops in and around the city of Rome, and most probably aggressive censorship, as evident from forensic analysis, might have made the women leaders less visible. Apart from domestic rituals, studies also show that women had leadership roles in public ritual performances. Although the church became more male-centered over the centuries, women served as deacons. As Dana Robert points out, the work of women deacons who nursed the sick and helped the poor in the history of Christianization of the Middle East in late medieval period. Women mystics like Hildegard of Bingen, excuse me, defied existing norms to lead, preach, compose, counsel, and see visions for the good of the community. It is established firmly today through rigorous studies that women across the different epochs of Christianity have actively lived the faith. The patterns of women participation, despite the androcentric rigid structures, are, excuse me, also observed in mission history. Excuse me. Akin to women in the early church, in the complicated history of Christianity and indigenous people, just as recent portraits of women in contexts of global South, Christian communities, where women are observed as most active participants in generally male-dominated ecclesial structures, there are also evidence of women active participation to active response to Christian mission in entirely different contexts and in different period. For instance, from the tortuous history of the church and indigenous peoples in North America comes stories of indigenous women who embraced Christianity enthusiastically in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Another aspect of limiting women's voice and perspective come from feminist scholars writing on the global South context with its diversities of cosmologies and cultural patterns. These scholars have voiced critical comments on the challenge posed by exclusive male notion of God in contexts where divinity is not limited to a male figure alone. More than the technical dogmatics, indigenous women have found meaning in shared experience of a faith that gives them hope. As Guevara explained, that there is a way of doing theology that starts with shared experience, from oral transmission, from the simple fact of sharing life. It is as though we were discovering very powerfully and starting from our own situation, the mystery of the incarnation, of the divine in the human, not just because we have been told, but because we experienced it in the confines of our lives as women. Jesus of Nazareth, as the incarnation of the divine in the human, became understood and experienced in community life. Even the foundational tenet of faith, the Trinity, can be understood with the experience of community life, where to be in communion means to be responsive, capable of responding to the other, and being grounded in the other. The commemoration of one defining event in the history of the faith gives the global community opportunity to make deliberate efforts to remembering of indigenous women who have embraced the good news proclaimed in the life and work of Jesus of Nazareth. The act of remembering that can happen within community, within relationship, that is marked by radical acceptance of women as created in the image of the triune God. Indigenous women around the world are beginning to bring their stories and their hopes and their knowledge. And it is critical that the global community receive their gifts. Jocobet Solano, Guna indigenous women from Panama, and writes prolifically, also writes poems. And I want to bring to us what she has written, calling us to listen to the wisdom of the indigenous people, especially in the context of the climate change and its challenges we face. So I read, voice of the indigenous women heard in the rivers, lakes, seas, and forests, voice of the indigenous women that cries out together with Mother Earth in defense of her body, the body of Mother Earth, Voice of the indigenous women that pleads together with the pains of the land of Nakwana. Voice of the indigenous women that sings with Sister Bird, and her song teaches us the wisdom of our ancestors. Voice of the indigenous women that dances together with the fire, and the fire gives her energy to fight. Voice of the indigenous women who, in the whispering of the wind, sends messages of the struggle for the earth. Voice of the indigenous women that sings to Mother Earth. Voices of indigenous women singing to the Roa, and from her they receive the grace to resist in order to live well in the community. Voice of the indigenous women who dances, sings, whose voice of struggle shakes Apia Yala. Voices of indigenous women that unite with water, wind, land, fire. They join together with Mother Earth, waiting for this new dawn of liberation for all indigenous women of the world. Voices of indigenous women singing with the creator of their hope for all Apyayala. Full stop and close quotation. Now to conclude, excuse me. As the 17th 100th anniversary of the First Ecumenical Council, the Council of Nicaea, is celebrated this year. In this changing landscape of Christianity and the entanglement of certain Christians with forces that are divisive and resistant to any form of the other, while in some contexts Christianity remains a minority, albeit meaningful for many poor and marginalized, including indigenous communities, and the threat of climate change as a consequence of Anthropocene lifestyle and consumption, the global Christian community is called to action towards radical inclusion of all creation. If the First Ecumenical Council, convened by Constantine, was a threshold for formation of theology that has guided the church through the centuries, that Jesus of Nazareth, God from God, light from light, bringing meaning to all those who hear the good news in Jesus, including the most marginalized like indigenous women, we are reminded to remembering of all God's creation. And in that remembering, the document, the mission document, Together Towards Life, helps us envision this as it declared. We must participate in God's mission in unity, overcoming the divisions and tensions that exist among us, so that the world may believe the church as the communion of Christ's disciples must become an inclusive community and exist to bring healing and reconciliation to the world. Affirmed at the First Ecumenical Council, the Council of Nicaea, Jesus of Nazareth, God from God, is the foundation of the Christian faith, who initiated an alternative movement that demonstrated the kingdom of God, marked by radical inclusion, born out of breaking the boundaries, have inspired many through the centuries, including indigenous women. Thank you very much for your time and for listening. And I look forward to your comments and your feedbacks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Atola. Thank you for inspiring us, for motivating us, and for sharing with us an Indigenous women's perspective on the Nicaea. As you were speaking, I caught a concept that you used, hierarchy instead of patriarchy, because often when we talk about women, we are always thinking patriarchy, but there are so many other power structures that affects women in different ways. So hierarchy feels more a term that should be used than patriarchy, even in this case where we talk about Indigenous women and how they're impacted by the first Nicene Council. Colleagues, we are going to have a time of Q&A questions. If those who have questions and those who have suggestions and those who have comments, this is a time for us to share our thoughts and all that. You can write in the chat if possible, those of you online. And if you are able to unmute and speak, that is well, great and also welcome. And in the room, we're also going to give our questions, our suggestions, and our comments. We just raise our hands and speak at will. Yeah, but maybe to start us off, I have one thought or question. How do you think, Atola, the 1700 celebration of the Nicaea and the conversation that might take place at the World Conference that will be happening in October, or is it November? How would that affect and impact the Indigenous women at the grassroots levels? How do they get access to that, to the communiques that will be made in these spaces, and to the decisions that will be made in these spaces, and a lot of other things that might happen? What is the possibility that Indigenous women or Indigenous persons at the grassroots level would be able to access this information?
Shall I comment?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think that's a very good question, and a very, I think, central question to help us as a community of Christians, community who still holds to Christ and his vision of God's kingdom that is very radically inclusive. So that is a very key question. Today we say we are a global village, old concept today, and digitally connected in such a ways. It's just amazing how things are today with the technology and digital empowerment. But at the same time, the people I am talking about, I am also one of it, but at the same time, we still have what we call digital divide, or we still have women who do not have basic education. For example, take the region that we come from, northeast, the border between Myanmar and India. As I said, it is also a region which is known to have a sizable population of Christians. Some would say some states like Mizoram, Nagaland, it's almost 100% Christian. All that church presence is very much known, but at the same time, there's so much of vulnerability, exclusion, and marginalization. This is graduating season in the college here, and I want to just share a story of how still vulnerability, exclusion still remains. One girl, she just finished New Testament, a master's in the New Testament, a very gifted, brilliant girl. And I asked her, so what is your plan? Do you plan to come back for your doctoral studies? She comes from the border of Myanmar, from the state of Nagaland. And she said, my village really needs me. Very less education. The schools are non-functional teachers are not there. The elders are asking me, when will I come back? So that is just one story. And I wonder what Council of Nicaea and its celebration of the 17th anniversary, how do they even will it even be relevant for them when day-to-day survival or their dreams of getting basic education is a struggle, no? So these are the realities, or also the Adivasis in central India, in East India, one of the most vulnerable communities in India. We call those the Bimaro belt. Their economic condition is us challenging us some parts of some parts in the global south. Many of these indigenous communities go out to the cities to work as laborers, to work as maids in middle-class homes in the cities. And many of them also carry their Christian faith. As I said, the tribal indigenous Adivasi communities have also been the responsive ones to Christian mission. So how the celebration of Nicaea, Council of Nicaea, impact these lives that still live so precariously? And if when we talk about these doctrinal issues of our unity, if we don't take into account that there are vulnerables, there are marginalized, there are those who still do not have a basic education. There are still people who have to leave their villages and go and work as maids. Then our celebration will be empty. So how do we, so I think we really need to include justice issue in this talk about right doctrines and right faith. So I think answers my my answer to your question. But we have to struggle. How do we bring these together? Doctrinal issues and very practical justice issues.
Thank you so much, Atola. We still have a long way to go. And I see David has a hand up. David, you could go ahead and ask.
Yeah, well, thank you, Matale, first of all, for putting together such a fascinating series of lectures. I really wish we also had the lecture that was cancelled, and hopefully sometime in the near future we can have that. But I eagerly wait for this issue of IRM to be brought out, because it'll be interesting to see all of the papers, including Atola's fascinating paper. Thanks, Atola, for sharing with us. I look forward to reading your paper. I think part of what you're saying really is that gender and gender roles are neither static nor biologically or culturally determined. Women's identity, their roles are, in a sense, constantly shifting, but perhaps not fast enough within the churches. So I deliberately say that because churches and Christian organizations in much of India are really slow to catch up with the rest of what is happening in other sectors of the Indian society. So, and this is well supported by the wider Northeast Indian literature. So just focusing on Northeast India, on women's representation in various sectors of society. And what this is bringing to light is that they are not really helplessly trapped, as is very often imagined by people. And they definitely don't lack in agency. So they are able to make up their own mind. They are able to make choices, and then not always determined by their biology or their multiple cultures. And what I'm trying to say, I don't really have a question. What I'm trying to say is that their resilience in the face of this kind of systemic socio-cultural constraints is worth recognizing and worth supporting. And I think your paper is significant for various reasons, but also for this reason, and that needs to be recognized. I agree with you that churches and Christian organizations throughout India are rather slow in catching up, but things are changing very fast in the wider scale of things, if you are aware of them.
Thank you, David. Atola, do you want to make a response to that?
Yeah, while it was not a question, but I think David, I think his comment really takes us also, I think, to the larger context. Indeed, I think the other sectors, you see women in some would say very radically empowered too. You have that, and I think that is the paradox of our these more modern nation state we call India, right? The paradox. You have millionaires, but you still have people who eat their daily meal from the trash of so paradox of this, and so also gender women, it goes, I think Northeast situation, women's situation, really also brings I mean, shines a light on what is Christianity and what is Christian mission. Lots of paradox. It's not just one story. It's not just one picture. Yes, you have. Think about my student who just finished New Testament, very good in Greek and all, from that corner in Northeast, almost Myanmar, from her village. And if we think about it, she coming to Bangalore, doing an MTH, excelling there, returning to her village where she will not have anybody to converse with her, like John Mabittis many years ago said, nobody will understand what she read in Greek, right? She really has to deal with every day how to teach these young boys to aspire beyond, selling the trees, cutting the trees and selling it for a few months worth of income, right? So the paradox, and I think this really brings a question to our mission. How do we decolonize mission? And what is really mission? I think it brings a very fundamental question to how do we witness today? So thank you, David, for that comment.
Thank you for your response, Atola. I see Kala as a hand. Kala.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation to be part of this series. And thank you, Atola. It's wonderful to hear you and to hear the call for justice and for decolonizing mission. I've been thinking a bit about, the how the experience of Nicaea were groups coming out of what had been persecution, and how bringing the bishops together was was an attempt at unity. And yes, there was coercion from above, but it was an attempt to create unity, to make some affirmations together that in the end ended up excluding. So I think that's one of the points of reflection today is how do we build, here comes Hakelbed, yay, move to invite unity in ways that don't exclude, and that's really important. But I also started to think then, I wanted to connect two things, was the initial, I think it was the initial lecture of this series from Susan Derber, which was sort of a creation focused and incarnational focused reading of Nicaea, which I thought, well, that has a lot of possibilities if we could invite people into that kind of reading of the tradition. But I'm also wondering, I think about Christians in the 2nd century, and they had, or even the 1st century, this sort of what it was like to be part of something new, that they had a sense of existing beyond their local gathering, but they, took some time to think about what to call it and ended up using the term Catholic. But I think it might be really interesting, and I'm really curious about how Indigenous women in Northeast India and other places, what ideas they have about community and Christian community existing beyond their local community. I think we need many more to listen to many more ideas and forms of understanding of what being part of a global Christian community is about. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Carla. Atola, would you like to make a response to that?
Before I respond to, but I want to say hello to Jokobet, a wise Indigenous women, the author of the Voices of Indigenous Women Calling to Respect Mother Earth, is also here among us. So thank you, Jokobet, for your wisdom. Yes, the sense of community and belonging from the Northeast, our Indigenous community, yeah, I think it is not static. I think it is also very important when we talk about Indigenous communities that today we are also challenged by the modern way of living, the anthropocenic habits, and modernization, all of these. So the community life that my mother, my grandmother knew is very different from what we know, even though today we still have a sense of that belonging, a sense of community in our own way, even if it has changed from our ancestors' days. It is also important to also note that I think exotization should be avoided when we talk about Indigenous women. I think we also live with the challenges as any community in today's very modern, challenging world. Despite that, as in the introduction, I try to take you to the mountains, you still see this happy participation in the faith. they are not important people, no? They are not given opportunities to stand and share. But they're very happy in participating in the faith, in the life of the faith community, like prayers, like visiting one another when there are illness, or when there is even a party, community feasting. They help one another, they share with one, and even more this you will find when you are in the villages rather than the urban area, no? What we call as towns or chilas. So there still exists this, but today it is being a challenge as market has really come in, and also this whole entrepreneurship, no? So before there was so much of sharing from one another's garden, but today I notice there's so much of things that are taken to the market. So we still live with these challenges, but within that challenges, I think the resistance to this lifestyle still there within their active participation is it's amazing to see how joyful participation of women in the churches. And I, as a theologian, who now lives a professional schedule life, no? From daily to annual, very structured. I'm amazed at the joyful participation in the faith. For me, sometimes it is very much professional and technical, I would say, no? But for them, it is just so much part of their early morning. They come for prayers. It's when at the crack of dawn, it's by 4 o'clock. They walk to the church for prayers. And so I think in this, I would still see glimpses of the community, and perhaps the global community, this coming together to pray, I think can be very basic that we can share. Sometimes I think we sometimes we don't have time to pray too. The people who do or who teach Christian theology like me.
Yeah, thank you, Atola. Is there any?
Can I ask? Yes.
I'll get a
Yeah.
question from Grishan and then I'll come to Brian.
So thank you, Atola, for your inspiring lecture, and I learned, several important things from your presentation. And also it caused me to think about something, and that is, you mentioned several times about empowerment for women. And I agree with you because I'm from Korea, and 70% of church members are women in Korea. But then they are not given important roles. Actually, they are like subordinate. And as you say, they are more like assistant for male leaders. So women need empowerment. But fundamentally, I think there is one more task prior to empowerment. That is liberation. Whenever I see, any kind of opportunity for empowerment for women within a Korean cultural context, the strongest opposition is from women. Very, very interesting. Not from men, but women says, no, actually, it's not, it shouldn't be done, So I wonder why women oppose to that particular idea for empowering other women. Because I think they are culturally imprisoned. So still they are understanding the gender role based on their inculturation in a particular context. And then in that inculturation and socialization process, women are brainwashed so that they believe that they are not equal and they're happy in that unequal status. So without liberating women, empowerment cannot be working from my viewpoint. And how can you liberate women from that imprisonment of their own culture and social practices? I think education. And Paul Fryer says we need conscientization to liberate people from their own imprisonment, whatever it is. So we have to educate not only women, but also men in the society. As long as men are standing in the same position, there's no hope at all. So we have to liberate women through educating men and women by emphasizing what is not working in our gender role in our society. So I want to know your comment about this issue, liberation prior to empowerment.
Yeah, thank you. And yes, you're right. Of liberation and women themselves being the ones who protest or who discriminate. And just to add to the points you have brought up about education and others, I would say I think we need to reread the Bible. We need to, I think, go back to read the Bible and read critically, and also pick up portions or parts that we have usually ignored. Like if we read about Corinthians, if we don't read Romans 16, Paul's women helpers. So I think we need to go back to this basic of reading the Bible critically and also as informed readers. And I think theological education is very much a part of that. So I think going back to reading the Bible, not just as a story, but also as a book that will open our eyes, what it means to be inclusive, what it means to be created in God's image. Everyone, I think so. We need to go back to reading the Bible. That's what I have been thinking recently, and I'm just sharing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Atola. Brian.
Yes, I thank you for this presentation. I've been involved in refugee as well as Indigenous work here in Canada for 40 years. My observation is quite similar to your own. I think there may be two parts that I see. I completely agree with Gwajen. There's a liberation from our theologies that needs to take place. But there's also a selection process that needs to be made. Early on, probably in junior high, it would seem, we need to see those who have the capacity and the capabilities to go on and make a difference. That process is going to be critical for the future, not only of refugees and Indigenous peoples in their places, but also for the church in those regions, because they are obviously need leadership. I'm wondering what attempts are being made in India for those issues, and whether you have perspectives from other parts of the world that you have picked up on.
Can I answer?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I don't know whether I understood correctly, but I think to liberate, we need to start early. I think if I understood correctly, is that how I understand?
Not quite. The liberation is one part. The selection and development of young minds that are noticeably need care and development is the other part. In other words, the discipleship from a young age to produce leaders.
Yeah. In the churches, we have very much active Sunday school classes. And some of the indigenous communities, these are very well structured and very well supported, sourced by the church. And many of the children who go through this, they are very well informed in their biblical knowledge. So that's from the church perspective. From the larger society perspective, and here I would call on David too, from his memories of his growing up in India. There was surely, I think, curriculum of social studies, all that included ideal citizen responsibilities and vision, yeah. But then it has not translated into real life, all these learnings in the church school or in the school, because just take the, excuse me, the violence that takes place in India, violence against women, and also the very rigid patriarchal practices we still have in very Christian, so-called Christian community like ours. Many indigenous communities have these Sunday schools, yeah, that have that see that the children are brought up with good Christian values. But still, these do not challenge the patriarchal cultures of excluding women, of discriminating women. So I think, it is, you are right, it needs to be started early on. But I think what materials or how church and the state still should work is something we need to continue to reflect, because it is not that we don't have these materials, these formation period, yeah? But still women continue to be excluded. Women continue to be abused and discriminated. And so therefore, more questions I think the church needs to ask. What are we doing right, or what are we not doing right? We don't discriminate women in sending for theological education, but the church is not open to employ them. So something is not right. So is it the colonization of mind that still has not began to decolonize, has not began to be liberated? Is it the way mission has been done? Christianity has been transmitted, and so therefore we need to unlearn and relearn. So I think communities of faith have to ask more critical questions or embarrassing questions sometimes. And so the task is not complete.
Can I follow that up in one sense? In my work in Canada, there has been an intense need to disciple individuals, to choose individuals and pour into them both leadership skills, biblical skills, spiritual awareness skills. And this is at an individual level rather than at a denomination or a national, obviously. Our systems fall apart when put in front of Christ. What we are asked to do is make disciples, which means a selection of individuals or small group of people who we pour into. Is in my work in India, I didn't see much of that happening. Are you seeing it happen?
No, I don't think I've seen that. Yeah. Resources poured into certain group or certain smaller, not macro, but micro contexts, no?
Yes.
Yeah, at the NGO level, because we don't have, I think, that kind of global. For instance, World Vision. World Vision is an international NGO that provides education to the most vulnerable, but it doesn't cater, even at the structure level, doesn't cater to all the states. It can only select. So I think, and when we say select, it is also not complete holistic. They're able to pay the fees of a girl, no? But maybe not have the extra tuition she would need in maths, something. So I think it is still very difficult.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Atola. And also just to say something about which is talking about liberation before emancipation and empowerment and all that. I was thinking of, I think immediately said that I remember the colleague when I was studying for my master. He's from Mozambique. He wrote a paper called Women Oppressing Women. And then I thought about that, my mind went to Jamaica. Bob Marley sings a song popularizing Marcus Garvey's speech, Redemption Song. And he says what? Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. So it is a secular song, it's not a gospel song, but it has very, very important justice issues that it raises that we as Christians as well could think about. We as religious persons of various affiliations, we could think about that we need to, especially as Indigenous persons, emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. He was talking about it in a context of slavery, obviously, but if you think about if we have to decolonize our minds, we are slaves to something that we need to emancipate ourselves from, just to contribute to that. And then Winnie has a question.
Okay, thank you so much for your presentation today. That led me to have a glimpse of the relationship between the Nicaea Creed and also equality of Indigenous women. So it seems to me that we are talking about equality of gender in general and gender equality, particularly in Indigenous women. So if you could name, because I still quite grab that, if you could name what are the difficulty or the main difficulty for the Indigenous movement in the seeking of equality in that context. Because as you mentioned about Ainu, I'm a missionary in Japan. So it's just until a couple of years ago that the ancestor bones that was taken from the Hokkaido University was returned to the Ainu tribes. And during the ceremony, mainly the male participate or present in the ceremony when the university staff return back the ancestor bones to the Ainu tribes. So I've been thinking, if there is no social transformation, that means the Japanese government respect the Ainu tribes, which they didn't at all in the history. And just until like the contemporary era or nowadays that they show a little bit of respect. But if there is no social transformation, there will be no respect for the women within the tribe, within the Ainu tribes, if you know what I mean. And so what do you think from the perspective of the indigenous women, what are the main difficulties that they're facing that is a little bit different from when we're talking about equality of gender in general? So if you could comment on that, that would be
Yeah, I
helpful.
think thank you for that very good question. I think one, if I have to name, I think it is still that patriarchal structure and its practices, which gets most manifest in the land ownership and participating in the village governance. And to explain, indigenous communities, we still find our identity tied to the village, to the clan, to the social community. Yeah. So even if we have become modern, or even if we have moved away from our village, even if I work in Bangalore, I am still identified by my clan, by my village, all that. Now that is still very much tied to the males. So I don't get till today. I can buy land outside my village anywhere, but I cannot inherit any of my ancestral lands. Also, our villages are governed by male councils, representatives of clans. There, we still don't have women. Women are not included in that. So, and governance to bring water, to make the road, to ask for a primary health center, to ask for a maths teacher for the school. All these are decided in these council, male council, and no women are included there till today. So the male-centered society that gets expressed in these governing council and land ownership. These two are the most difficult, the most, what should I say? Difficult part of getting to be fully member. And also, if women will marry out from her village, in many of the indigenous communities, she no longer belongs to that village. She will belong to her husband's village. And so the situation is even more precarious. So she will not have access to the land in her father's village. Also, if she is widowed, she will not have access to the land of the husband. It will be taken by the clans. So I think the traditional customs that still privileges male, these are the difficult part for women in many of the indigenous communities in Northeast India. But that doesn't mean to say that a woman can acquire education and she can be a politician in the state structures. Yeah, she can be a bureaucrat, she can be a lawyer, she can be a doctor, but still it is very much a modern identity. But when it comes to the tribe, clan, indigenous identity, she has no voice and she has no right of land.
Thank you,
Hope
Atola.
that answers the question.
And maybe just a little bit to add on what she's saying. When we talk about gender equality generally, it's, well, women everywhere face similar difficulties. There are similarities in the difficulties that we face. But there's an importance in naming ourselves, like I'm part of African women theologians. That is very important because that then distinguishes the level of similarities that I have with Anne. As an African woman, I may have to face double more than what Anne faces. And so I need that to be heard out there. That's why you will find there's Mujeres theologians, that is Latin American women theologians, and Indigenous women. So we name ourselves just in order that it is known that while we are all women, we are not all sisters under the skin, because sometimes Anne might be more privileged than I am. We might have the same qualifications, but she might be more privileged than I am because I'm Black. So there are those levels. That is why naming is important.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions and comments? No. Well, thank you very much, Atola, for inspiring us and for motivating us and for sharing us on Indigenous women's perspective of the Nicene Creed. And thank you everyone for participating. I saw Sarah walk out. I wanted to ask her to tell us about the next series that we'll be having. So we will be having a next series on, not Nicene, sorry, on MBL lectures, but it won't be Nicaea anymore. My colleague Sarah will be taking us forward with that. And I'm sure we'll communicate via emails to see all that will be coming in the next month. So you are all welcome, please, to attend these as well. But thank you, Atola, for being the one who ends up closing our Nicene series. Thank you so much. And you all have a blessed evening or morning or midday, whichever it is where you are.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Modali, for the invite and for the opportunity, and to everyone for your comments and questions. It helps me in clarifying what I have written. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And wait, I'll just stop the recording.